Hello, hello.
We are.
Let's see who we got.
Everybody today. Yeah. For people to, and I hear it. I'm going to try to address that. Didn't have that before.
It's getting better.
Okay.
Well, excited to be doing this.
Yeah, me too, right? Welcome into anybody that's hopping in to join us to the first of the ScaledOn SEO Q&A sessions. I know that the team has been doing sessions across all of our different verticals, right? So we've had ones with media and with Amazon, but I'm excited to jump in on the SEO end today. For anyone for whom my face may be new, I'm Courtney. I'm the director of SEO here at ScaledOn, and I am joined by Alec Newcomb, our founder and resident AI enthusiast. Which kind of merges the two verticals, right, of SEO and AI today that we're excited to chat about with everybody. So it is an open QA session, so anyone and everyone is encouraged to drop in questions into the chat that you may have. We look forward to covering all of the different things that anybody would like to talk about as it relates to SEO and AI or anything else that may come to mind, as we're chatting through things here. We wanted to have an open chat, fireside style chat, but just maybe not by the fireside here, here in August, in the heat of summer in the US anyway. So where do we think we want to jump in, Alec? If there are any questions from anybody, please feel free to drop them into the chat. But otherwise, I think, one of the first things that comes to mind for me is that I think AI is very intimidating for a lot of folks. And where is a good starting point for an AI novice, for someone who's really just starting to think about AI as it relates to SEO or to their website, their e-commerce business? Like, where would you say is like a good place for them to start?
Yeah, so I think, hopefully you have an AI of choice, right? So, many businesses you're using Copilot, right, which is based upon Bing. Maybe you're a ChatGPT user, maybe you're Google. So I'd start with, searching for your brand and your AI of choice. And how are you showing up? And are you happy with that visibility? Or guess what? Is there a gap between what you're seeing? And what we're seeing is there's some real differences. Categories matter, right, between those places. So I think, depending on what industry you're in, right, if you are a 60 chain retailer, right, you know what I mean, and you've got a lot of local queries, guess what? You may not be seeing so much of a gap, right? But if you are an educational institution, a nonprofit, right, maybe some places in some other areas, or, for example, your website had a lot of informational content, maybe you're seeing a really big change, and I'd start there.
Sounds good. Where do you have the top 3 questions or tools or things? Like, how do you evaluate, where to begin? Like, what's a good query or starting place? So someone picks their AI tool of choice. Like, where do they go from there? They decide they're going to use this AI. What's next?
Yeah, so I think, hopefully you have Google Search Console set up, right? Or at least you have it connected to your Google Analytics, right? GA4, right? And you'd want to understand what are your top queries. So I see lots of people make this mistake is they use SEMrush or an external tool, right? Because those guys are very good at marketing and selling new pieces, but it's not your actual data. So the first thing is like, what are the top 10 or top 10, 20 queries that are driving traffic to your website, and particularly actually converting into business for you? And I would start there, and I would be putting those in at the very least into ChatGPT on one side, and to Google sort of the new AI overview on the others, and just understanding, like, are you happy with how that's pulling back? It's not scientific, but it's really powerful to be able to send your boss a screenshot to be like, and I've seen this, right, going back and forth where, someone where they are, having a top ranking today in what I'll call traditional search, they're nowhere to be seen, or they have a very minimal setup, and presence in AI related search. And that's how I'd start.
Yeah, sounds good. So I think once you start with that and you get some initial feedback from AI, there's the what do I do next? How do I modify my content? How do I use that information to benefit me? And I think what naturally kind of comes from that is a little bit of the how is Google looking at AI content and AI developed pieces? how are they ranking that? Because obviously, as we know, and I know you've got some great stats on this, AI and ChatGPT are definitely starting to grab that share of voice, but Google right now is still leading. And so we need to make Google happy while we make space for AI. So what does that look like as far as how do we keep Google happy while we start to integrate AI?
Yeah. So the analogy, I think this is a really key point that a lot of folks miss, right? Is we got to do both. And that's hard, right? That's if you have a smaller marketing team, that is really tough. So today, just like, and I use the analogy like radio and television didn't go away; they changed, right? And sort of, there's still plenty of people watching television today. So you still have to be active in that channel, if you're a major brand, right? You can't just write it off. And this is going to be the same piece for Google, right? So guess what? If you want to recruit people, or you have an e-commerce brand, guess what? Those things are still very dominated by Google, right? And those places. And so I think you have to really step back and say, hey, what kind of user intent are we serving, right? Like it's really easy to get lost in the numbers and the terminology and all of this garbage going around. But to come back in and say, you know what? Like if let's say that you have a high ticket item. Well, from early data that we're seeing is that research is moving into platforms like ChatGPT, right? If you have a lower cost item, let's call it an item under $50 or a more consumable item, guess what? That's still happening in Google, Amazon land, right? To a high degree. So I would step back and understand like your particular user's intent, and then think about how you're going to meet both masters. How are you going to sort of make sure that you're showing up the way you want to for those queries in Google, but starting to build a bridge towards a world where, guess what? With ChatGPT growing 5 times faster than Google was at the same point, we all need to anticipate that that's going to continue, and be ready for it.
Is there a vertical that you think has to be least lower, has a lower level of concern where this shift with AI comes? Like, do local customers have less to worry about than e-commerce customers? Do you think that it kind of is across the board? In my mind, I feel like AI has been a great leveler at this point. It really is universally going to impact everyone. Maybe the timing's a little different, but it's going to impact everyone. Do you foresee that being the case, or do you think that there's some folks that maybe have more time than others with this explosive growth?
I would agree with that. Like, I think it's going to impact everybody, just like the internet impact everybody, so like I always, encourage in my newsletter and pieces, the AI skeptics, like my wife is a leading skeptic, my dad, like I've got a bunch of great people who are like, oh, AI is not going to impact that. And from the data that I'm seeing is AI is impacting all places. It's just not going to be even. Right. So there's going to be really lumpy, and that makes it hard because what I see a ton of the content out there today is talking about things in generalities, and that really doesn't help you. Like if you run, a small business that is, geographically locked, right, and you're trying to get people in the door of your store, some of these generalities are really not very useful.
Well, and I think that's a key point, right, is talking about usefulness. And I think that's the one thing that, in my mind anyway, as I know we're executing SEO here with ScaledOn, that we continue to focus on, which is the user experience and what the end user's goals are. And I think that even with AI, AI and SEO, geo, whatever of the terms we want to apply to it, I think as long as you're continually thinking about optimizing for your user and for what they're seeking, and not getting too general, not getting too surface, you're going to be better off in the long run. What would you say? I know CTR is a big talking point right now. Like a lot in the industry are talking about organic click-through rates that are dropping as a result of AI summaries. Where's your level of concern with that? And, what would you recommend as far as the fear of that's coming and how we address that?
Yeah, so I think the first thing that we need to think about there is that all of the tools that are trying to measure this are wrong. That's the first piece. You know what I mean? So no one has a clear, grasp on what's really going on, Courtney, because it's just moving too fast. Does that make sense? In an age where, like let's just call it that Google updated its algorithms 4,000 or 5,000 times a year. Like now, if you look at any of the indexes, like changes are pegged, like changes are coming out like all the time. And this is true for Perplexity. This is true for ChatGPT, right? They're changing things dynamically. So the first thing is, I would say, take a breath, like chill out. You know what I mean? And so like, if you get one data point, that's not sufficient to go blow up everything that you're doing. So, 1 point's a point, two's a line, three's a curve, and you got to start assembling that picture of, hey, you know what? Is this a trend? Is this something that I'm seeing over time? Was it a one-time thing because of the algorithm got updated? Or guess what? You know what? Like, I'm seeing my decline month on month and year over year, and this is really concerning, right? And so guess what? Then I'd be digging in and sort of, starting to, I don't want to say freak out, but starting to worry against those pieces. I think CTR, we know, like, just this week, the Perplexity ranking signals leaked. And so, we know that we know as a fact, because of court cases from Google, that, they said they weren't looking at these things, but they are, right? They look at interaction, CTR, time on site, through the Chrome browser. We know that Perplexity is looking at this. We need to assume that, ChatGPT is as well. And so guess what? Maybe it's time to refresh the titles on your page. Yeah. Maybe it's, you know what I mean? And I think a lot of people forget this is, we publish it and we disappear, right? Rather than thinking about this as an organic breathing piece. And so I think, it's going to be evolving there.
Yeah, it's never one and done. And I think that, it's a good point that, yes, of course, we don't want CTR has to be a factor, but how are you addressing engagement and the pieces that are happening when someone does click through to your site, like not getting so micro-focused on, who's clicking through and how you're nurturing and engaging with people that are, since those are just as important of a signal. We're about midway in here, so I want to pause really quick just to mention that, this is absolutely an interactive Q&A. So please feel free to ask questions in the chat if you have any. If you're shy or you kind of want to get the lay of the land before you feel comfortable doing that, I get it. Live on the internet is a whole new animal. So you can also reach out to us via email at team@scaledon.com with any of your questions or anything that we may be able to help you with as it relates to kind of the opportunity of AI and SEO, because I think that's a really good way to position it, is opportunity and not threat. I think a lot of people look at it from a fear perspective, and I think there's a lot of efficiencies and really, playground levelers that, that come from that as well. So if anybody that's here hanging out with us has questions, don't be shy. I promise we're friendly. I wear my smiley hat for a reason. So ask the questions that you have, but in the meantime, we'll continue to chat around all of these things. This may be a tricky one to answer because I know, there's a lot that could happen in the 3 months, heading into 2026. But what's one, SEO tactic that even as AI evolves, that you still would put foot front and center, as we head into a new year?
Yeah. So the way I've been thinking about it is, what are the things that are not going to change in this, sort of storm of change? What are the things that are going to, be consistent? And one of the things is your overall authority matters, right? This has been very clear across all the platforms. So, if you'd let that slip over time, right? Maybe you didn't, invest in branding as much as you should have. Maybe you're not doing some PR, like there's various tactics there that we could discuss depending upon your brand. I think authority matters to cut through all of this AI slop, and it's become even more critical. The other thing that I would say is video is not going away. And it is very, very clear to me from sort of my, I like to test various things, is that, if that content is on YouTube and it sort of matches up with what's on my website, or that website even better, that content on my website even better has a YouTube video in it, we know Google loves itself, right? And we know that the AIs are training themselves on video. And so I think, the two things, if I only came back and said, do two things, is make sure that your authority is where you want it to be vis-a-vis your competitors. And then if you're not heavily investing in video, I think you're going to be at a structural disadvantage, because the LLMs love video.
Yeah, let's step back from the from lingo for a second, because what occurs to me is if we have anybody who's really a newbie in here, right? Like, what does authority mean? How are they measuring that? Where are they looking for that score? How are they gauging where they stand with that?
Yeah. So we used to have something called PageRank. I mean, we still have PageRank, but Google used to show us what the PageRank was of the website, right? And then in their sort of, mode to make it harder for black hat guys to go, cook nefarious strategies up, they removed it from us. And so there are people like Moz and SEMrush and Ahrefs that have their own version of that. And it's typically on a scale of 1 to 100. And if you think of someone like Amazon, they're 100, you know what I mean, or 99, the top websites in the world based upon traffic, brand authority, rank very highly on that. And so it's a crude estimation of those pieces, but it's a very useful estimation of those pieces to sort of say, hey, how many votes got to your website? How much traffic are you getting? Like, are people finding you useful and relevant?
Yeah. Would you say it's one of those core data points, but it's a data point? So again, it's not something to over index on too much, oh, my authority is really low. It's something you need to be aware of. It's something you need to put a strategy together for, but it's one of many. So if somebody had to pick like the top 3 data points that they reported back on to their higher ups to gauge how their SEO is working on, like, and I know this is a really general question and it's going to vary by site, but where would their starting point be? What would you say they should look at?
Yeah, I would start at the bottom of the funnel and work up. So how many sales got driven by organic, right? So like if you're in the lead business, you know what I mean? How much business got generated from your organic results? If you're in e-commerce, right? What kind of sales came from organic as a percentage, right? And you can track that month over month and see, is it going up? Is it going down? And then in the middle of the funnel, like, I don't know anyone who has a lot of extra time. So I'm really, I really want to understand how much time people are spending on your website. And we know that they're looking at this, it doesn't matter, whether it's AI or non-AI, right? If you don't have a quality engagement, that's a problem. And I see a lot of people, they optimize for traffic rather than engagement. You know what I mean? And so I think you can get out of whack there. And it's, I would be looking at that fact. And then at the top, however you want to form it, but let's call it visibility. And I think all too often people look at that visibility based upon sort of things really broadly. And I think you got to sort of hone it down. So for example, if you are, and I'm just going to pick this, if you're a restaurant, you have a draw radius, right, to that. So it doesn't matter that you're ranking really well in Texas if you're here in New Hampshire, right? And so I think coming back in and understanding, well, wait a minute, like, what are the queries that are actually getting people in the door? And am I showing up for those? And the hard part, and for people to get around about, but every day, about 15% of the queries into Google they've never seen before. And so I think in this dynamic time, you've got to be thinking about that, right? Of these sort of query change behaviors and, coming back in and saying, well, wait a minute, like, I know that it was always like, I really cared about, like, if you're a local business, this near me query. That may not be the query of today. That may be the query of the past. And so I think it's really important to ask, like, we don't know. You got to ask your customers, like, how did you find us? Like, what did you put in there? You know what I mean? Like, did you talk? Like, this is, I was working with a student, and they were flabbergasted to find that people were talking in their car to find their business.
Sure. Yeah, right. Well, look, as technologies change, I think technologies change and evolve. AI, obviously, a huge factor there, but also laws, right? Like laws as far as whether or not you can hold your device in your hand while you drive, or engage with it at all, is going to drive more and more to voice. And so, absolutely, that's going to be a huge factor. And I think that then there's the technology evolution, where technology is assuming things for you. So it's assuming when I ask a question that I want to know the answer near me without me saying near me. So those are absolutely, I think, factors that come into play. What would you recommend as a cadence for looking at that, right? I think that's the other thing that can be overwhelming to people sometimes, is how often do I need to be reevaluating my strategy and looking at all these things?
I think this is a really key question. So, from what I teach in the UNH classes, is I think this depends on your time budget, right? So if you are a professional marketer in a company, you need to be looking at these things monthly, right? If you're a small business owner, you might be looking at these things quarterly, right? It really depends on what kind of time you have to go put into it. And what I recommend that you do is, you try to set up some automated system, either from Google Analytics, ideally, or if you're using other tools, where it sends you a report on that cadence. So instead of you having to think about going in, signing into it, like make it as easy as possible, the least friction, where the report comes to you. And then I'd also recommend that you schedule some time on your calendar, because if it's not on the calendar, you're not actually going to get it done.
Right. Yeah. Time gets away from everybody. It's the most limited commodity, right? I see we did have a question come through. I've noticed my CTR is dropping even when my rankings stay the same. Is this normal?
Yes. So this is a great question. So we are seeing CTRs drop, right? And that's because things are moving to these AI overviews, right? So, if you think about it, and it changes by sort of different areas of queries, right? But if it's a more informational query, Google may summarize that answer for you, right? And you're not going to get the click. And so, for example, for like news publishers, a lot of the news publishers' traffic is down 40 or 50%, because guess what? It summarized the headline of the article, or the intent, the body of it, right? So like maybe you're looking for, oh, hey, what's the best new restaurant in my area? And guess what? It just summarizes you, and they don't actually get the click. And so that's what you're seeing CTRs go down, and this is what Google is saying, but it hasn't matched up with the other third-party data that we're seeing. And what people are reporting, is people are seeing sort of lower amounts of traffic and lower amounts of clicks, but Google is saying there's been increased visibility because people are using these kind of queries more.
Okay. So when you talk about those AI summaries, and I know there's really not a proven playbook yet because this is evolving too much, but where would companies start if they want to try to become part of those AI summaries, right? Like if they want their information, to potentially come into an AI summary, where's a good starting place to start to be part of those results?
Yeah, so I think, first of all, I think it really matters on the query type. Is it informational? Is it navigational? Is it commercial? Because I think I'd have very different answers depending on what you're trying to, how you're trying to build a bridge to that consumer and meet them, right? And I'm going to answer it the other way. The first thing is that I would diversify. You know what I mean? I think Google's share, depending on people's numbers, is down from 0.5% to 2.5% already. Just in sort of like queries there. But in a world where ChatGPT is growing 5 times faster than Google was at the same time, it's literally growing vertically. I think you need to be thinking about other places, like how are you showing up on YouTube? How are you showing up on Reddit? How are you showing up on Amazon? You know what I mean? Like there's lots of other search boxes in your world. And are you happy with all of those on one side? And then when it gets to the Google specific pieces, I think, a lot of people continue to optimize things in a very narrow way. And because these are, these are neural networks, they're very broad systems. You've got to think about how I'm answering that topic for that cluster. And I think a lot of people they're like, look, I want to rank for best, Indian restaurant near me, right? Or some very specific one-word query. And I think that's SEO of the past. And I think the SEO of the future is to come in and say, okay, you know what? Let's do all of the possible queries, right?
Yes.
Around this, and make sure that I'm showing up for those things, and make sure that they're interlinked, and make sure, do I have a video for those? Have I done a social post on all of those things, right? Like, is it a balanced diet rather than sort of this laser focus on this keyword?
Absolutely. So kind of cluster analysis, and then a checklist below that of kind of what's your distribution plan for that cluster, so that you're really targeting that across multiple verticals. A couple more questions have popped into the box here. How might we prepare SEO, not for live AI engines, but for the next Chat GPT or Claude crawl, so we have a chance to appear in future models?
Yeah, so this is a really great question. This is a very nuanced question. So what this, what they're asking about is basically there's training runs that happen. Okay, so to think about it, and in my old days when I ran a search engine, we would call this a catalog, but they're basically sort of two different databases that sit here. There's one where, like, guess what? ChatGPT was trained in 2024. Today we're getting ChatGPT 5, and we'll sort of see the dates, the expiration dates of when it got ran, right? Because it basically has a cutoff to it. So on one side, you have a strategy of getting, I'll call it, into the main catalog of AI, right? And I think that's a very different tactic than, oh, okay, all of these guys, because they know that this may be a year old or 2 years old, depending on the model, right? They're refreshing that with like a smaller, more like recency relevancy catalog. And I would use different tactics, again, depending upon your vertical and business. So for example, like press releases are making a comeback, you know what I mean? And some other pieces to get into that recency bucket, right? Versus, using sort of that clustering piece to get into that foundational bucket.
I'll branch off of that really quick to say, I know we've alluded in a couple of instances here about how the answer may vary depending on your vertical or your business. And so that's where we are available for more specific questions. Don't hesitate to reach out to us if you have a follow-up question that's specific to your business. We're here to help with that. So you can find us at scaledon.com. You can email us at team@scaledon.com if you have something more specific you'd like to dig in on. But let us know if that answered your question, or if you have a follow-up or some additional questions that branch from that. And while we wait to see on that one, we had another one pop in. How does Google treat AI-generated content these days? Will it hurt or help my rankings?
Yeah, so this is something that I've done really extensive testing on. So for example, if you take the US Constitution and put it into most sort of AI detectors, it will tell you that the US Constitution is AI, right? Is written by AI. And the founding fathers didn't have AI, thank goodness, when they put that together, right? So I think there's real challenges with some of these AI detectors. I would come back in and say, and Google's come out and clarified these things, right? So it's an evolving piece for them. So they've come out and said there's nothing wrong with having content generated by AI, right? So that AI human partnership. What they've come out in is saying if you're doing programmatic SEO, or if you're flooding us with a bunch of AI slop, right, we're going to go block that. And what I've done, so I run a whole bunch of sort of sites and blogs where I do my own testing. And I've had no challenges, and we've seen this as well with clients. We've had no challenges ranking AI content. And I think, it's the new word processor. So if you came back in and said, hey, you know what, I'm not going to use the internet and I'm not going to use word processor to create content, you'd be at a disadvantage.
Yeah, I think that's where it really is key to continue to look back at those engagement signals and at the quality of things. If you're still, if you're generating content for AI, but you have human interaction and you're doing it on the basis of what your users are seeking and providing valuable information, then your AI content is still going to be useful. It's still going to get the engagement that you're looking for. And I think that's going to help that content rank, whether it's AI generated or not. If you're just using AI, to generate content as a volume play, that's the slop that you just referred to, and that isn't going to help your engagement or help you at all. Should we be optimizing for algorithm or user behavior now?
So again, I think it matters. The vertical matters, in this. But I think you always should prioritize the user over the algorithm. But you need to worry about both. And the way I think about it is the algorithm is a gate that you have to get through. And if you don't get through the gate, right? If you don't get through the YouTube gate, if you don't get through the Instagram gate, if you don't get through the X or Twitter gate, you don't get any visibility, right? So so this comes back to your technical SEO, right? This comes back to on-page factors. You know what I mean? Like, guess what? Like, if no one's heard of your website or your brand, you can't expect that they're going to show up and do this. So I think there's sort of like, I call them the fundamentals, the building blocks that you have to have done, to get that going. And then, I always want to be user-centric in what we're trying to put together, and I use my mom as an example. Like, if my mom wouldn't be happy with it, we shouldn't hit publish.
Always a good barometer, right? Mom is always a good go-to. Well, I think, we're at the 30-minute mark, and I want to be respectful of time here, but, I'll allow a minute or two here for any last questions that anybody may have. But in the meantime, like, what would be your wrap-up point about AI and SEO and the opportunity? Like, how would you encourage everyone to walk away thinking about it?
So I agree with you, Courtney. Like, I think, there's a lot of guys selling newspapers on the negative news, and I think this is honestly one of the most exciting times to be a digital marketer or a marketer, right? Because we get like a lot of these amazing new tools. And the question is, how are you going to use them to show up in new ways? And so, like, if you're very fixated on, I have to rank for this 2-word query that I've been ranking for the last 10 years, I think the future is going to be difficult for you. But if you come back in and say, you know what, I'm going to create amazing user content and I'm going to use AI to customize it for all these distribution channels that I was never in before as a small business or as a marketer, I think it's a really exciting time.
Yeah, I 100% agree. Look, I think change is always scary, but it's always a phenomenal opportunity as well. And this is obviously a huge change. And we're here to help with that. So if anybody is hanging out and they didn't want to ask their question today, or maybe they think of one later, don't hesitate to reach out to us. Again, we can be reached at scaledon.com, team@scaledon.com. I think that we use to generate content for AI. That is the vicious cycle, right? We use AI to generate content for AI to appear. And yes, right. That is the vicious cycle for sure. Well, I appreciate the questions that we have had asked today. And Alec, thank you for the time. I know the team will be back in 2 weeks with our next round of Q&A with the ScaledOn team, covering all the different topics and ways that we can help. But you know where to find us on the web if we can help with anything. And otherwise, Alec, thank you so much for the time.
Thank you, Courtney, for hosting. It's great. It's great to join you.
It's been awesome to be